The sound of my head snapping sideways echoed in my ears before I felt the burning sting across my cheek. My father's gold class ring had caught my skin, and I tasted copper as warm blood trickled into the corner of my mouth. For a suspended moment, everything in the room crystallized: my mother's strangled gasp, the winter sunlight catching the family photos where we all smiled like nothing was wrong, and my father's face, twisted with rage yet suddenly uncertain as he stared at his own raised hand. "Enough of this performance," he whispered, but his voice had lost the thunderous confidence from seconds earlier. I touched my cheek, looked at the smear of crimson on my fingertips, and something inside me hardened into diamond. 3 months of dismissed agony, 3 doctors who'd been intimidated into silence, and now this, the ultimate betrayal from the man who was supposed to protect me. My name is Nora, I'm 19, and this is the story of how I made my father face the monster he had become. For months, I'd endured pain that started in my spine and radiated through every nerve until even breathing felt like swallowing glass. Each morning began the same way, with Jack Mitchell, respected business executive and community leader, pounding on my door, demanding I stop malingering and get to my college classes. Image was everything to him, weakness was intolerable. The perfect family he presented to the world couldn't possibly include a daughter with unexplained pain. "Get dressed," he ordered now, yanking away my blanket. "You have 10 minutes. When I tried to stand, my legs buckled beneath me. Instead of helping, my father towered over me, his 6 feet 4 inches frame casting a shadow across the floor where I'd collapsed. "Jack, please," my mother Rita finally spoke, rushing to my side. "She's in pain." "Pain?" He scoffed, straightening his silk tie. "She's manipulating us, Rita. Just like your sister did before she ran off with that artist. It runs in your family, this dramatic behavior, this need for attention." The mention of my Aunt Laura, Mom's sister who'd escaped our toxic family years ago, sparked something new inside me. I'd spent my life trying to earn my father's approval, shrinking myself to avoid his displeasure. But as I knelt on the hardwood floor, blood on my face from his hand, I realized I didn't want his approval anymore. I wanted justice. "If you're so sure I'm faking," I said, each word precise despite my ragged breathing, "take me to University Hospital right now. Let them do an MRI. If they find nothing, I'll never complain again." Something flickered in his eyes, the businessman who never walked away from a challenge. "Fine," he spat. "We'll end this charade today. Rita, call the hospital and tell them we are coming. When they find nothing, Nora, you're going to apologize to everyone you've inconvenienced with this nonsense." The 15-minute drive to the hospital felt like crossing a border between 2 lives, the one where I accommodated my father's reality and whatever lay ahead. Each bump in the road sent lightning through my spine, but I refused to make a sound. I watched his white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel and mentally photographed every detail of his rigid profile. Evidence. In the emergency room, my father's commanding presence initially got the same results as before. The attending physician glanced at my chart, noted the previous unremarkable exams, and reached for a prescription pad. "Anxiety can manifest as physical." "No," I interrupted, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "I want a neurological consult and an MRI. Now." My father's jaw tightened. "Nora, let the doctor." "Is that a bruise on your face?" the physician asked, suddenly focusing on my cheek. The emergency room went silent. My father shifted his weight, his authority wavering. "I fell," I said, my eyes locked on my father. "People fall when they're in too much pain to stand. Unless someone thinks they're faking." 40 minutes later, Dr. Pamela Whitmore, a neurologist with steel-gray hair and matching resolve, entered my curtained area. After examining me, she turned to my father with glacial professionalism. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm ordering an immediate MRI. Your daughter's symptoms are consistent with several serious neurological conditions." "This is ridiculous," my father started, but Dr. Whitmore raised her hand. "What's ridiculous is that this young woman has been in obvious distress for months without proper testing. This stops today." For the first time in my life, I saw someone stand up to Jack Mitchell and win. He sat fuming in the waiting room while I was wheeled down the long corridor to the radiology department. As the MRI machine's rhythmic clicking surrounded me, I realized I wasn't afraid of what they'd find. I was afraid they'd find nothing. 2 hours later, Dr. Whitmore returned with the results, her face serious but kind. She put up several images on the lightboard, pointing to areas that made my mother gasp and my father lean forward. "This," she said, indicating a large mass near my spine, "should have been caught months ago. Your daughter hasn't been acting, Mr. Mitchell. She's been suffering from a spinal tumor that's been growing increasingly aggressive." The word tumor seemed to vacuum all oxygen from the small room. I watched my father's face drain of color, his perfect posture crumbling as he stared at the indisputable evidence. But she's only 19, he whispered, his voice suddenly small. She needs immediate surgery, Dr. Whitmore continued, her voice gentler now. The good news is we caught it before it could cause permanent damage, but only barely. My father turned to look at me, and I saw something I'd never witnessed before, fear in the eyes of Jack Mitchell. The hand that had struck me hours earlier now trembled as he reached toward my face, stopping short of touching the bruise he'd left. I turned away from his reaching hand. Don't. The surgeon scheduled my operation for the following week. The tumor's position is precarious, she explained. We need to act quickly, but the procedure carries risks. There's a possibility of paralysis if anything goes wrong. During these consultations, my father sat silently taking notes, his usual dominance replaced by a desperate attention to every medical detail. When Dr. Whitmore mentioned possible complications during one session, he actually excused himself. My mother later found him vomiting in the bathroom. That night, unable to sleep through the constant pain, I heard unfamiliar sounds from down the hall, my father crying. I did this, his voice carried through our home's thin walls. I made it worse, Rita. Our baby was suffering and I made her condition worse by forcing her to keep going. What kind of monster am I? Using the wall for support, I made my way from my bedroom down the hallway to their partially open door. Through it, I saw my father on his knees, his head in my mother's lap as she stroked his hair. I keep seeing her face, he choked out. Every time she fell, every time she begged for help, I punished her. I called her weak. I hurt my sick child. Before I could move away, he looked up and saw me. For a moment, we just stared at each other, me leaning against the door frame in pain, him kneeling on the floor with tears streaming down his face. Nora, he whispered, my name sounding like both a prayer and a plea. I didn't respond immediately. This moment, seeing him broken, seeing him finally confront what he'd done, was what I'd needed for months. Part of me wanted to walk away, to let him drown in his guilt. But another part, the part that was still his daughter despite everything, made me stay. Do you remember when I was 7, I said, my voice measured despite the pain, and I fell off my bike? You made me get back on immediately. Said pain was just weakness leaving the body. He flinched at the memory. I was wrong. God, I was wrong about so many things. You taught me that showing pain meant I was failing you, I continued. So when this started, I tried so hard to hide it. I took pain relievers by the handful. I wrapped my back in heating pads while you slept. I bit through my lip trying not to cry out. I did everything possible to be the daughter you wanted. Each word landed like a physical blow. He made no attempt to defend himself. And still, I said, when it became too much to hide, you didn't believe me. You mocked me. You hurt me. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he whispered. No, I agreed. You don't. The pain hit again, making me gasp and stumble. Instead of demanding I straighten up or accusing me of exaggeration, my father gently helped me to sit on their bed. I'm scared, I admitted, something I would never have dared say before. Me too, he whispered. Those two words represented the biggest change of all, Jack Mitchell admitting fear, admitting weakness. He reached up slowly, his fingers hovering over the bruise on my cheek but not touching it. When, not if, you get through this, things will be different. I will be different. How can I believe that? I asked, the question holding years of doubt. Because I've never been more terrified of losing anything in my life, he answered, his voice breaking. Not my company, not my reputation, nothing compares to this. You're my daughter, and I almost let my pride blind me to your pain. I didn't offer forgiveness that night. Some wounds were too fresh, some betrayals too profound. But as I lay in my bed later, trying to find a position that hurt less, my door creaked open. Instead of the angry demands I was used to, my father entered quietly, carrying a chair. I thought maybe I could sit with you for a while, he said uncertainly. When I nodded, he settled in beside my bed. Try to rest. I'll be right here. As I drifted between sleep and pain, I heard him speaking softly. I remember the day you were born, he said, probably thinking I was asleep. You were so small, so perfect. I promised I'd protect you from everything. Instead, I became something you needed protection from. The morning of my surgery, I woke to find him still there, his suit wrinkled from the night watch. For the first time in my life, he hadn't shaved or meticulously styled his hair. The mighty executive who once fired an employee for wearing the wrong shade of blue looked completely undone. As the nurses prepped me for surgery, he stayed close, his eyes tracking every movement, every wince of pain on my face. "Please," he said as they prepared to wheel me away. "She's my little girl." Those words, so simple, yet he'd never said them before. I'd always been his legacy, his successor, never just his little girl. The last thing I saw before the anesthesia took hold was my father pressing his hand against the viewing window, tears streaming down his face. I learned later that during the 8-hour surgery, my father never left the waiting room. His assistant called about an emergency board meeting. He told her to give his position to someone else. "My daughter is in surgery," he'd said. "The company can burn to the ground for all I care." When Dr. Whitmore finally emerged, her face tired but smiling, she announced, "We got it all. The tumor's gone and there's no sign of paralysis." My father, the man who prided himself on perfect composure, fell to his knees in the waiting room. His sobs echoed through the hallway, years of manufactured strength crumbling in an instant. Recovery was slow and painful, but different from before. Every grimace of pain wasn't met with accusations of weakness, but with gentle concern. My father learned from the nurses how to help me walk, how to manage my medication, how to assist with physical therapy exercises. For 3 weeks, I remained in the hospital as my body began the healing process. When I was finally discharged, my father had transformed our home, creating a recovery space in the living room so I wouldn't have to manage the stairs. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after returning home, my physical therapist Jen commented on the change as she worked with us on my exercises. "Your father's like a different person," she said as we worked on my mobility. "When you first came in for your initial evaluation after surgery, the nurses told me how intimidating he had been during your diagnosis. Now he's the most attentive parent I've seen." She was right. The transformation was remarkable. The man who once refused to miss work for my school events now spent hours helping me relearn how to walk. His phone, once surgically attached to his hand, stayed silent in his pocket. A month into my recovery, he came to my room carrying a small wooden box. "I've been going through old things," he said, sitting carefully on the edge of my bed. Inside the box were photographs, hundreds of them, chronicling my childhood. This one, he pulled out a photo of me at age 6 trying to climb a tree. "You fell right after this was taken. Instead of comforting you, I made you climb it again. I thought I was teaching you resilience." His voice cracked. "I was teaching you to ignore your own pain." He showed me picture after picture, each one accompanied by a memory and an apology. The father who had never admitted fault was now acknowledging every mistake, every moment he'd chosen pride over love. "I'm stepping down as CEO," he announced suddenly, putting the photos away. "The board can find someone else to run things." "Dad, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted gently. "I've spent your whole life choosing that company over you. Never again." 3 months after surgery, we returned to Dr. Whitmore's office for follow-up testing. After reviewing my latest scans, she declared me tumor-free. "Your recovery is progressing exceptionally well," she said with a smile. "We'll continue monitoring with scans every 6 months, but I'm very optimistic about your prognosis." The scars were healing, and my strength was returning. But the biggest change wasn't physical, it was in how our family functioned. My father had officially resigned his position, taking only an advisory role that required just 10 hours a week. He attended therapy, both alone and with me. He learned to talk about feelings instead of suppressing them, to show vulnerability instead of demanding perfection. The man who once ruled through fear now asked for family game nights and Sunday dinners. He reached out to my Aunt Laura, my mother's sister, and apologized for years of animosity. After several phone conversations, she agreed to visit us for the first time in over a decade. 6 months to the day after my diagnosis, he organized a family dinner. As we sat around the table, me now able to sit comfortably, Mom smiling more than I'd ever seen, and Dad in casual clothes instead of his usual suit, he raised his glass. "To second chances," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And to my daughter, who taught me that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about having the courage to get back up and the wisdom to help others when they fall." Looking at him now, it was hard to believe this was the same man who had once struck me for showing weakness. The tumor that had threatened my life had also broken down walls we'd lived behind for years. "And to healing," I added, raising my own glass. "All kinds of healing." His eyes met mine, and I saw not the stern executive or the demanding father, but simply a man who had learned the hardest lesson of his life, that sometimes our greatest strength comes from facing our greatest mistakes. The bruise he left on my cheek had long since faded, but its invisible imprint remained between us, not as an open wound anymore, but as a scar that marked where both of us had been broken and begun to heal. This wasn't a story of revenge in the traditional sense. I never set out to destroy my father. But in demanding to be seen, truly seen, in my suffering, I forced him to confront the man he had become. And in that confrontation, we both found something we'd never had before, a real relationship built not on fear and perfection, but on truth. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't about making someone suffer as you suffered. It's about making them see what they've done, and then watching them dismantle their old self brick by brick, rebuilding something altogether different in its place. I still have physical therapy twice a week. My father drives me there every time, waiting patiently in the reception area, his business empire now run by others. Sometimes, when I glance through the glass doors, I catch him looking at me with a mixture of pride and lingering regret. The other day, when I completed a particularly difficult exercise, he didn't tell me to push harder or do more. He simply said, "It's okay to rest when you need to, Nora. I'm learning that too." And in that moment, I knew my revenge was complete. The father who couldn't tolerate weakness was gone. The man who replaced him was someone I was finally getting to know, someone who was, at long last, worthy of being called Dad.